Soundcast.
This is a Village Soundcast Network original production.
Welcome to Lends Me Your Ears. I'm Stephen Cook, arts reporter for the Chronicle Herald here in Halifax.
I'm Carsten Knox, a blogger at Flaw in the Iris at halifaxbloggers.ca, and the movie guru at CTV Morning Live.
This is a movie podcast where we look at some current films and then examine some older titles that might be tangentially related, and hopefully you'll learn something about some films you might not have seen before. On this week's show, we get fast, we get furious, we get four on a very sticky theater floor. It's car movies on Lends Me Your Ears.
Hey, Stephen, how you doing?
Hey, Carsten. Are you feeling fast or furious today?
Oh, you know, maybe a little bit of both. Yeah, that movie made all the money this weekend. All of it. Everyone, by the time that people listen to this, it will have made all plus all everyone else's money. It'll just have all the money.
What is it? What is the draw of this series? No, I'm asking rhetorically because I totally understand what the draw of these films is, but
Yeah.
it's and we're going to talk about this, but it seems to harken back to a past age when you could see a movie that it was just a bunch of car wrecks from start to finish.
And it didn't necessarily need to make sense. It didn't have to have like really solid grounding in reality in any way. It just needed to have a certain kind of quality to it.
A certain adrenaline. We are, of course, talking about Fast 7.
Fast 7, that's right. Or Furious 7.
Is it Furious 7 or Fast 7? I'm
both.
losing track.
Yeah, the titles are kind of interchangeable at this point.
We had Fast 5 and Furious 7, and it's sort of magnificent too, and some ways.
I had to explain that Hateful Eight, which is the new Tarantino film coming out at the end of the year, has no relation to Furious 7, even though both films have Kurt Russell in them.
But yeah, I think the Hateful Eight don't have anything that's fuel injected.
Oh, that's true.
From
that's
what I gather
right,
what I've gathered from that one trailer that we've seen so far.
But it's funny, this franchise is not one that I liked when it started. I remember seeing the first one and kind of shrugging at it, and then I ignored the franchise for years. But then I think when maybe Fast 5 came out and the reviews were really positive, I thought, okay, maybe it's worth taking a look at it again. I think what turned me off was it just... I liked car movies when I was a kid, but I liked, American Muscle, and I liked exotic super sports cars, but I wasn't into the whole tuner culture, which is what I think the franchise was originally built on, these small economy cars, with big engines to make them performance crazy, and then the bad men who drive them.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about those kind of tuned up Japanese models either. The road racers turned out from old Honda Accords or what have you. It's just there's just no real romance there,
Yeah.
And it's interesting how traditionally the movies about these cars, if we're going back to the 70s and maybe even further back, how they tend to fetishize the cars, and those ones it's just hard to get all worked up about unless you're really into that sort of thing yourself personally.
Yeah, it's true. A lot of the cars in the movies, which we'll go back to talk about, are fetishized, but it's also about cars are a great metaphor for sex, speed, freedom, and a lot of these movies in the old days were just westerns, basically, like a man out in his own, making his own law against the man, the bad guy, the who usually was a cop or some form of authority, which that tradition certainly extends to Fast and Furious movies.
Yeah, oddly enough, the original Fast and the Furious from 1955 was basically, the Western analogy is a good one, because basically John Ireland breaks out of jail where he was for murder he didn't commit or whatever, and has to trying to get to Mexico before the cops get him, and he kidnaps a girl for whatever reason, I don't know, as his insurance policy maybe, and it's basically a desperate road race for the border, and kind of in the style of the juvenile delinquent films of the day. I guess Ireland himself directed it, and that property, I guess, was even though it has no bearing on this series aside from the fact that the characters are on shady sides of the law while they're driving the hell out of these machines. That's pretty much the only connection, but it's such a great title. How could you let it go? But all the iterations are just, from Tokyo Drift to Too Fast, Too Furious. It's they're taking a lot of liberties there.
Yes, yeah, I think so. I'm impressed with this franchise. Having gone back to rewatch them all, the basis of the first one, the sort of B movie, criminals, outlaws on the road, and the cop that tries to take them down and then begrudgingly learns to respect them, kind of thing. It was fine. I was never a big fan of Paul Walker. Rest in peace. But I can understand the appeal of Vin Diesel, and I think he's kind of the heart of the thing. When the second movie came out and there was no Diesel, the film really suffered accordingly. The third one is kind of a self-contained little teen movie set in Tokyo, and Diesel does show up in that one at the end just as a cameo. But it's actually kind of cool because it sort of stands alone, and it's out of continuity with the rest of the films. It actually sits somewhere between around the end of 6 and then 7. It sort of lies astride those two films. But eventually, when Justin Lin, who directed the third movie and was written by Chris Morgan, when they took over with the 4th, 5th, and 6th, they really turned this franchise into something special. I think they took it from its sort of, they stripped it down to use some automotive analogy, stripped it down to its the frame, and they put in a new engine. And the 4th one was not bad, and the 5th one was killer. That's the one. Fast 5 is so much fun. I absolutely loved it. And the 6th one was pretty great too. Fast 5 was like Ocean's 11 in Rio with a multinational cast. With crazy stunts, lots of great fun, and then the Fast and Furious 6 was more of a Bond movie. Half of it was set in in London, and I really enjoyed how they applied those kind of spy tropes to these characters and that world with a lot of humor and of course the crazy cars. Now we get the Furious 7, which. It has this sort of sadness about it because one of the lead actors died in a car accident while it was being made. But although I didn't like it as much as 5 or 6, I felt like they were true to the spirit of the thing, and it was quite a send off for Paul Walker.
Oh yeah, we get the teary montage at the end. I hope I'm not spoiling anything here, but it's pretty well known that they don't write him off, as it were. In the film itself, so but it's just kind of odd to have that it's weird. It's almost like a very special episode of a TV series where they've lost a cast member. It's kind of an unusual thing to see in a major motion picture to do that kind of thing.
It's true, but at the same time, I think there are things about these stories that they keep coming back to, which is sort of brotherhood and family and family and the bromantic aspect. it's truly the relationship between Dom and Brian is super romantic. The Brian, not to be disrespectful, but I suspect that there must be a lot of fan fiction out there about how these guys hook up in the garage, up against the hood, because there's so much love there and so much passion between the two guys that actually I don't see it as much between the guys and their romantic interests in the films. But I'm
going to be looking up // as soon as I get out this, what's out there.
But I thought that the way they handled it in the end was sort of true to the tone of the films, and it went. They took the character and they kind of faded into the actor, with all the montage and with all that sort of like blue sky stuff. I don't think it's a big spoiler. Obviously they're going to pay tribute to this actor who passed away sadly, while and sort of sad ironically while making this film, given the way he died.
But at least with the montage, you get to see how his haircut improved over the course of the film, so that's a big plus.
Yeah. And actually how I think his acting improved. I think with age, I think he became more comfortable and just more at ease in the role, and I didn't find him so annoying the further along he went. I also thought that, although he wasn't an actor with a lot of range, he did have the physical requirements. In a movie like this, you got to be athletic, and he had all of that.
I think once he stopped being a cop, sort of all right, he used to be a cop, right?
Yeah, he was a bad cop. He was
a terrible policeman.
Yeah.
But once you got beyond that, then okay, well, now I can live with this character a little bit more. But yeah, it's such a weird arc to trace from like street racing thugs to international agents of mystery. I mean, in the new film, we of course we get Mr. Nobody. We get Kurt Russell comes in as this kind of shadowy government agent with infinite resources at his disposal, who hires these guys to go after a hacker who's being held somewhere deep in the Caucasian mountains with access to a device that will control the world.
Yes,
we've definitely gone from Ocean's 11 into Casino Royale somewhere
Yes.
along the line with this series. It's just like I don't know how they could. They'd have to go into space.
Yeah, I
in
think
the next
so.
episode
Well,
to really top themselves.
Bond did that with Moonraker, so
That's true.
there's a precedent. But no, it's crazy. And I mean the plot holes in the seventh movie. Maybe next to the fact that I'm a big fan of doing stunts for real. Like, I love to see them do crazy stunts for real. And from what I've read, they actually did drop cars out of the back of an airplane in Furious 7. But I did feel that in some of the scenes, the CGI was really painfully obvious, and it sort of took me out of the film. And in places, my favorite car stunts are when they actually do them. Someone pulls that stuff off. But then there's the plot holes, and you can ignore them if you want. You pretty much have to.
You don't have much choice. Otherwise, you're gonna have a dent in your forehead from palming your face all night. Watching this thing.
Yeah, but I never really understood why they signed up with Mr. Nobody, because the Jason Statham character who was coming after them, he showed up at every single place they went. Azerbaijan, Abu Dhabi, there he was. They didn't need some device to try to find this guy. He was there.
He was there. They just set a trap for him. But
yeah,
I don't know. I guess they figured Kurt Russell had some resources that they could have used, and
yeah,
I don't want to think about it too hard. It's just fun to have Kurt Russell, just back in wisecracking tough guy mode.
Yeah, and I think secret weapon with the not so secret is Dwayne Johnson. I mean, the guy is so much fun. Ever since he's shown up in the series, he just like, every time he's on screen, you're just like, what is he going to do next?
Although he does spend most of the movie in a hospital bed. We should probably make that clear.
That's true.
But he has a pretty amazing fight shootout sequence with Statham off the top, and then of course he shows up like the cavalry at the end. But for most of it, he's kind of sidelined. It's true. But there's no lack of supercar driving and custom muscle cars too. Probably because he can't fit behind the wheel of a lot of these cars. Yeah, that's probably what it is. They'd have to bulk out the doors or something like that. Yeah. This series is it's fun to have a franchise that has that kind of just dumb momentum to it, totally. where you can just watch it just careen from one scene to another without having to worry too much about where these characters are going to wind up or what have you. The CGI aspect of it didn't bother me too much, although I sort of realized they probably aren't going to drive a car into that helicopter, whatever. Yeah, there's that. Even though I think that did happen in one of the Terminator movies, as I recall. But the motorcycle. I think you might. Car. Yeah, I think you were right, or maybe one of the Die Hard movies, maybe both. Oh, probably. It's everyone's dream to somehow destroy a helicopter with a vehicle, or in the case of Ninja 3, The Domination, a ninja. But wow, great reference there, Stephen. Nicely done. Way too deep. It's this certainly turns on all the pleasure centers, because you can go and enjoy it for its sheer dumbness. I sometimes I wonder if it's being kind of dumb on purpose, like having a big desert supercar racing event called Race Wars. I'd like to think that was on purpose. Yeah, I do too. There's sifting into the plot a little bit of in jokes here and there that you can appreciate if you really want to go there. Yeah, definitely touching on the zeitgeist there. Yeah. So I guess the feeling is I'm with you, Stephen. I think that the series is fun and playful. I think with so much serious, heavy fantasy stuff, it's fun to have a more playful and in some ways a throwback, but
But I can't say that I'm particularly a fan of the gratuitous bikini floss scenes that show up in every single movie. The like a Vanilla Ice video or something.
Yeah, well, we have the race wars, of course, at the start, and then, of course, the big party scene in Abu Dhabi.
Yes.
Where I don't want to spoil anything, but, a car drives between 3 skyscrapers.
Yeah, so not on the ground.
Never touches. Well, it does touch the ground eventually.
Yeah.
not with humans in it. But it's just I guess they know their market.
Yes, I guess they do.
It's they kind of limit it to a couple of key scenes, which is nice. At least the female leads don't have to undergo that sort of thing.
Well, that's been true certainly since Lynn has come aboard, is that the female characters have a little more weight and a little more to do than they did in the first, say, 2 or 3 movies. Yeah, I would say definitely the first 2 movies where it was about bros and machines and code.
Oh, there's always a computer chip hidden somewhere that has to be retrieved from something.
Yeah, I'm thinking a different kind of code, but I see what you're saying there, buddy.
Does Jordana Brewster ever get to drive anything? I'm trying to remember.
I think she does. Yeah. I think
she might have been the second last, the one before the last.
Yeah,
one.
yeah. No, she's sort of been, become the mom now, so is not part of the heavy into the action anymore. But yeah.
You never see them work on the cars anymore. I think that was mostly maybe just in the first movie, but
yeah, it's true.
They've cut away the chaff. It's like, we know Dom's the best mechanic on earth. We don't need to see that happen. So.
Yeah, he's too busy saving the world now to work on the cars himself. But I personally would love to. I mean, I actually quite enjoy the scenes where they're having a barbecue and they're cooking up some corn in the backyard or something. Those kinds of things. And I mean, it speaks to that whole like family thing that has become so important in the series, that all these different characters from different places are all bonded by some kind of familial connection, which is very sweet. And I always remember that most of the action movies you see, people aren't eating things. It's nice to see people eat.
The fast and the delicious.
There you go.
I live my life 1/4 rack of ribs at a time.
So when I watch the Fast and Furious movies, I can't help but think about the movies I loved as a kid, and movies actually that I didn't see when I was a kid, but when I've caught up with since then. There's this whole group of sort of existential, low-budget car movies of the 70s that really still stand up, and I think the Fast and Furious movies are indebted to in a lot of ways. Certainly, if nothing else than just the vehicles, the sort of passion for muscle cars. And we watched Lane Blacktop from 1971 recently, directed by Monty Hellman, and it's a pretty special machine.
Yeah, it's a film unlike any other, really, because it does fetishize, humanize the cars to a certain degree in a way that I was trying to think of when this probably started, when they started focusing on a car because I mean, cars have been in the movie since the two both coexisted. If you go back to the Max Sennett comedies and the crazy things they're doing with vehicles and smashing them up and driving them off cliffs and all that kind of thing back in the silent days. So it's it's nothing new. It's certainly this fascination with the motorized machine goes way back. But for some reason my brain couldn't go back much further than Bullitt. To back then, that fastback Mustang that Steve McQueen drives all over San Francisco in some very weird continuity. And that seems to be kind of the jumping off point for this new breed of vehicular action films. That car and sort of the connection between the guy and his car got taken to another level. And then we start to see films like Lane Blacktop and Vanishing Point, where man and machine becoming one and driving off into oblivion are really become this overarching theme.
Yeah, and Oblivion is right. I mean, if you think about the ending of those two movies, they're both from 1971, and they both feature, the cars of the era, which were these crazy gas-guzzling performance machines, and they both end with quite a downbeat sort of. Well, it's a little more ambiguous with Lane Blacktop. The actual celluloid burns, but Vanishing Point is kind of final with an explosion. But there is something similar there. The highway just burns up these characters. And I watching them again, I realized how much of the Western outlaw aspect is also built into these movies. I think America makes great Westerns, and the story of the freedom-loving pioneer who does things his own way by his own rules is baked into these movies.
Yeah, you're only looking as far ahead as the next tank of gas, basically.
That's right.
It just seems these characters are just you wonder what kind of existence it is, and in a lot of ways, Lane Blacktop's a pretty bleak kind of picture. It's this back roads of America. You've got the mechanic and the driver, James Taylor, and as the driver, and Dennis Wilson from the Beach Boys in, I think, his only acting role, but extremely charismatic and winning on screen. Both of them really. It's kind of odd that they never chose to go that way. But and then of course GTO, who's more the button-down conservative guy in his stock off the showroom floor GTO versus the gearheads.
And played by Warren Oates. It's interesting to parallel this with, let's say, Easy Rider, because Warren Oates' character might be the Jack Nicholson character a little bit, except he's much more. He has a much more interesting psychological sort of profile. He's clearly like a fantasist. He likes to pick up hitchhikers to tell different stories of his life, and I mean it all sounds like lies. Like he never tells the same story twice, and he connects with these two guys who are really true to the machine, and they seem to be very focused and together, and he wants to. He sort of, you see his anxiety and his neuroses next to these guys, but he drives this GTO and in his many colored cardigans, which is an interesting.
Yeah, it's weird. How many? 5, 6,
6 or 7 different colored sweaters, and we never see him change. He just suddenly shows up in the next scene with another one. Yeah,
it's very odd. I really want to. Of course, it's out from Criterion. I really want to explore some of those extras a little bit more and see if we could figure out the reason behind the different sweaters, if there's any at all, or it was just something they came up with where every day, I guess, you would have a different sweater. Whether or not the color reflects anything, it's hard to say. But I
also wanted to say the sort of existential nature of these movies. They don't get into a lot of reasons for anything. These people are just there. They're on the road, and they don't even have names. Most of these characters, they're what they do. And of course the heavy on the French New Wave influence as well. They're kind of spacious films with a lot of time and the sort of a gradual. For movies where people are going very quick, the actual pace of the scenes is pretty deliberate.
Yeah, it's very odd, and dialogue is kind of ground down to the bare bones. Lane Blacktop, I was amazed by how it kind of moves along, but it's weird at this very measured pace, even though we're supposed to be hurtling across country in this race between the two cars to collect the pink slips in Washington D.C. and they're somewhere in New Mexico or someplace.
Yeah, and that doesn't even really become, as it goes along, it becomes less and less of a plot driver, to, no pun intended. Like it's just like it's out there somewhere that they're supposed to be racing for this, but really it's more about their interactions and the character Laurie Bird as the girl, her relation with the two guys and how she kind of makes life difficult for the two guys in the Chevy, and then she connects with GTO as well, and all this other people they meet along the way.
Yeah, they kind of pass her around like a baton. It's very
yeah.
I don't mean that in a crude way, but she sort of bounces from car to car, and there's this weird kind of one-upmanship that happens. They're kind of leapfrogging. They're not really so much racing as exacerbating each other's problems, and
yes.
but with this bizarre camaraderie at the same time,
because they don't really. I mean, the two guys in Old 55, they are actually quite kind to GTO, even though he's pretty aggressive and unpleasant. What I also liked is that the girl, she takes matters into her own hands. I mean, she's very much self-motivated. At a certain point, she realizes that she needs off this train and leaves them in the dust, which I think is handled really well.
Yeah, and nobody seems too upset about it when she leaves either.
Yeah, that's right, because everyone's just so damn cool, and I think that's one of those French New Wave things, is that people, the coolness is just part of the deal.
Maybe this is a time to interject some trivia, but as I learned from the supplements, and this isn't going to be any news to anyone who actually has a copy of the movie, but for Two Lane Blacktop, the 55 Chevy, there were actually three of them. They had, one was the camera car for mounting a camera on the outside for all the interior shots and stuff, and then another was kind of like the full on souped up race car, and then there was another car that was used for maybe some of the stuff that might risk damage or whatever. So there are three cars. One of them wound up going into the scrapyard, so they know it got crushed. So there were two cars. One of them was used in American Graffiti. It's the car driven by Harrison Ford in the race at the end of American Graffiti. And that car still exists. It's got a nice glossy black paint job. And most people think of it as the American Graffiti car, even though it has this pedigree. The camera car was a little... someone who was a big fan of the film tried to track it down. Eventually found out it was sold to somebody from Canada. At some point, like a couple of teenagers owned it. They painted it white with racing stripes. And then somebody in Canada bought it, painted it flat black. And then someone in Ontario, and then they sold it to somebody in New Brunswick. So actually, one of the Two Lane Blacktop racing cars, the Chevy, was actually in New Brunswick for years and years.
Oh, nice.
And so this guy tracked it down, managed to buy it off the guy in New Brunswick, drove it back, but then he had to find the original doors because they'd been replaced, and somehow he tracked them to a salvage yard in Woodstock, Ontario, or something like that, and eventually, and painted it like this grimy gray color, just like in the movie. So that car, the camera, one car exists in the condition it was in for American Graffiti. The other looks like it did in Two Lane Blacktop with the gray primer, flat, unimpressive looking paint job. So kind of nice that there's a bit of a maritime connection there, though.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, I think, part of the what makes these movies special as well is that often these cars become kind of iconic later in the running. I actually found out, I want to hop to another bit of trivia. One of my favorite car movies is Thelma and Louise, which is maybe the only one that I can think of that is just the story of two women in these kinds of roles. And the 66 convertible Thunderbird in Thelma and Louise recently was up for auction for, I think, $71,000 or something. You could buy that thing if you wanted. One of the picture vehicles that was used, which obviously didn't go off the cliff. But that's those kinds of stories are great. I love to see that.
Now, do you remember seeing Vanishing Point for the first time? We should maybe touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, just a bit. So I mentioned it. I can't remember when I first saw it, honestly, but it was, I didn't see it when I was a kid. It was one I caught later, and I remember enjoying it a great deal, and certainly it has a lot of the same qualities as these other films, the Western aspect. One thing I did find out about Vanishing Point, the story basically is this guy who's driving this white Dodge Challenger from Colorado to San Francisco. He wants to do it in 15 hours. I Google Map that, and it's almost 20 hours drive from Denver to San Francisco. So clearly, to do it in 15, to cut down a quarter of that time is a hell of a thing to do.
Yeah, you'd have to be going like 120 for a good chunk of it, miles.
Yeah.
But I hadn't, and it's funny, Richard Sarafian, who directed it, I don't know a lot about him, and it's not like he made a ton of other films, but this film just seems so remarkable to me, and I think it was kind of distant in its day. I saw it, I was in my early 20s, so I'm still kind of learning about films in a lot of ways, and I saw this movie on an old Laserdisc. It wasn't even on VHS at the time, but I found a Laserdisc of it, and I don't know, just looked like a cool movie from the early 70s, and it really blew me away. I did not expect it to be this kind of mystical journey via Dodge Challenger. It's just, it starred Barry Newman, a guy I knew from a 70s TV show called Petrocelli, where he played like a crusading lawyer. And, I kind of knew him from stuff like that. I didn't expect him to see him as a pill-popping gearhead who's just, I think an ex-cop. It's revealed in some flashbacks, I think. So just determined to make this beeline from Colorado to San Francisco, come what may, and it's just the hell he unleashes along the way. It just and the character, it's just, there's so much soaked into this film. And then later I found out that they'd even cut stuff out of it and flashbacks with Charlotte Rampling and all this stuff.
Oh yeah, I didn't know.
They found out about it wasn't until the DVD came out that they restored some of this stuff. So there's like a longer cutout there.
Mm-hmm.
with the radio guy egging him on and the
Right.
community kind of rallying behind him. It does have that kind of, it's like Shane or something like
Yeah.
that. He's practically a ghost anyway. He's kind of just a pale shell of what he used to be.
I like one of the things about these movies I think that I really enjoy is how while these drivers identify, sort of become one with the vehicle, I think it allows audiences to sort of arrive in their own sort of like their fantasies about freedom on the road in a way that because often in these movies, there's bikers and Hell's Angels and various weird characters, sort of peripheral characters that people meet out on the highway that kind of play a role. And I think to myself, that as we spend more time with these people in their cars, there is that. It's you become part of the warriors of the road and I wonder whether or not those muscle cars like those Chargers and there's those Challengers by Dodge we think of them as kind of iconic vehicles now, but at the time, they were kind of the regular. They had performance for sure, but they were, off regular machine tooled factory cars,
Yeah, there wasn't they could sell that as, power. How often do you see power sometimes used in terms of truck advertising, but not so much with regular, street cars these days. But back then, you look at the old TV ads for some of these things, and, with the dawn of the Mustang, it really was about, appealing to your baser masculine nature.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
For these kind of cars to drive faster than you can legally, go. And,
yeah.
And that it was kind of a short-lived era, really, of the muscle car in its heyday, because, of course, then by the mid to late 70s, or the gas crisis, as it was then perceived, kind of took over, and the imports from Asia and elsewhere touting fuel economy, really kind of came to the fore, and then the muscle car thing just felt wrong somehow.
Yes, yeah, fair enough. It was a brief but powerful powerful era, and and I think Vanishing Point is very much worth seeing along with Lane Blacktop for anyone who is looking to look back at them.
And I see, I think Gone in 60 Seconds is one of the films we were talking about earlier as well.
Yeah.
Which, another Mustang, Eleanor, you reminded me, the yellow Mustang that is the Ne Plus Ultra of this guy's mission to steal, I think, 50 classic cars in the course of 24 hours.
48, I think, something
48.
like that. Yeah, and the thing about it is that it's different in the way it distinguishes itself from these other two that we mentioned, is that the guy who directed it, wrote it, produced it, and stars in it as the character Main Drain Pace is his name, which is a great handle. H.B. Halicki is also the stunt driver, so he did everything in this movie, and he drove all over Los Angeles. And I would say the last third of the movie is just chase. It's all just chasing.
Yeah, it's like 40 minutes of just chasing.
Yeah, and the plot is he and his group. He's a car thief ringleader who's also his day job as an insurance investigator. So he has to steal these specific models of cars in a short period of time. The acting is pretty amateurish, but there's a lot of comedic moments. There's a hell of a lot of voiceover too, interestingly, where you don't actually see people talking; you just hear them having conversations about stuff. And then about at a certain point, I was starting to think I was watching the Beastie Boys Sabotage video because the hair and
Yes,
everything is
much.
pretty crazy. But the only credit in the beginning of the film for a performer is Eleanor, which is the '73 Mustang that they see everywhere. This yellow Mustang. There's plenty of them on the roads apparently at the time. And then one of them is the Halicki gets into one of these cars and drives it all over the areas around Los Angeles and the connecting towns, which greater Los Angeles. And it is amazing the stunts that they do, and you can see all the people standing on the side of the road because clearly some of this stuff they didn't worry about crowd control. They're just like, we're gonna do the stunt and people can stand and watch if they want.
Yeah, it's this bizarre bit of guerrilla filmmaking, and that was a monstrous smash at the box office at the time. I mean, it's back when the drive-in market actually counted for something. It was certainly big on that kind of circuit, but the film just played and played and played. And, I remember I mean, I was only 7 years old at the time it came out, but I remember TV ads for it and just being like really excited, even though there's no way in heck I was going to be allowed to see this movie. But just the title was such a great title, and just the shots of these cars smashing into one another. I mean, it's I did have the Smash Up Derby, play set, the cars where you pull up the ripcord and the two cars go over a ramp and crash into each other.
Yeah, sure.
Parts fly off, and it was the joy of watching two cars crash into each other couldn't be underestimated. And certainly seeing ads for this film, it just got me pumped up. But I didn't see it for years and years. It was unavailable for a long time. I think there were some music rights issues that kept it off of home video until they finally they released it with a completely new soundtrack.
Uh-huh.
They redid all the music, which was a big disappointment to those who saw it the first time and loved it. And I think there might have been a VHS copy with the original music, but it's now this like weird generic jazz kind of soundtrack that doesn't really. I'm not sure if they didn't want to pay for the original music or they thought that this other music sounded more modern. Because of course H.B. Halicki died shortly after I think his second movie Junkman came out, where he's basically playing a fictionalized version of him. He's playing like a guy who was a filmmaker who made they actually reference Gone in 60 Seconds in Junkman. It's not really a sequel, but he's basically playing the guy who made Gone in 60 Seconds, but under a different name.
Okay.
And some gangster is out to get him, and he's on the run with all these different cars. And at one point, I think he crashes a car into a helicopter. I just remembered in Junkman. So maybe that's where it started.
Yeah, there you go.
And it's not very good. Hoyt Axton plays himself. It's but it's got this weird arrogance, and that it's like, I made that other movie and now I'm going to make this movie and tell my story. But the chases scenes and the stunts are fantastic. The film can grate on your nerves because it's so self-aware that it's kind of grating. But it's definitely fun to watch one after the other and see how they kind of dovetail in this bizarre universe that he's created.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend the remake of Gone in 60 Seconds, which
the Nicolas Cage one.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, the cars are great, and Angelina Jolie is awesome, but stick with the original.
Well, on the level of Gone in 60 Seconds, I mentioned the whole the drive-in circuit thing, and that was a huge part of movie going in 50s, 60s, and 70s. Kind of the drive-in started to vanish after the mid to late 70s. I mean, we still have a couple here in the Maritimes, independently owned. The chain ones are long gone. And but again, Roger Corman was kind of the king of that realm for a lot of his films, and there was just they quickly realized that the cheapness of finding some old clunkers and banging them into each other would somehow have some sort of appeal. It was a cheap production value kind of stunt. You could make these low budget films, wreck a lot of cars that were probably didn't have much life left in them anyway, and that would bring them running for miles to see these films. And I love the fact that esteemed Academy Award winning filmmaker Ron Howard, that his sort of mature film period after being a young actor, a child actor on Andy Griffith's show, and then coming into his teens with like American Graffiti, not demanded, but asked Roger Corman for the chance to have a shot at making a film. And so we got Ron Howard as the teen rebel, or the young adult rebel in Eat My Dust and Grand Theft Auto, which I believe is the one that he directed himself, and that's kind of where it all started. A crazy film with he steals I think his girlfriend's dad's Rolls Royce, and then there's a crazy chase across several county lines and lots of car wrecks, and nothing especially new about those films, but he brought this kind of weird farm boy charm to it. He wasn't like the grizzled outlaw or the juvenile delinquent or anything, the wisecracking kind of attitude filled juvie. He was like this kind of fresh-faced kid who was just had a love for cars, and Ron Howard pops the clutch and tells the world to eat my dust. It's just weird to think of him in that way, especially after the sort of the clean-cut happy, coming in between like Happy Days and Andy Griffith, and it just showed that anybody could fit into this formula, I guess, of finding a lot of cars and smashing them together and for ultimate cinematic effect. And it was kind of like the weird flip side to someone you were talking about, Burt Reynolds,
right,
and the kind of success that he had with similar kinds of films where, this kind of Southern action films, these low budget.
Yeah, many of them being family friendly action movies. Not all of them, but certainly it didn't have to be these cold existential movies. These car movies could be. I mean, Burt Reynolds was associated with that black Trans Am in Smoking the Bandit. And that was a huge movie. It might have been the biggest movie the year it came out, is '77, if it wasn't for maybe Star Wars or something around that time. And Burt Reynolds, I really liked that guy. I mean, I saw Cannonball Run a ton of times when I was a kid, and it's funny because it got him out of the Pontiac and into an ambulance, and he kind of was the comedic, the most comedic parts. I mean, there was a lot of comedy in those movies. Roger Moore getting to riff on his James Bond persona, but it was about the cars too, certainly. But I mean, when you get Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. together to be soused and drive across the country with all these other famous folks, there's a lot of charm in those movies, even though they really weren't very good.
No, not at all. In fact, I kind of think that's sort of the beginning of the end for Burt Reynolds in terms of, being not necessarily a bankable movie star, but being someone who had some cachet, I guess, in a way.
Yes.
That that was where the self-parody starts to come in. And, there was still some, Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, was a triumph later. And of course he did some dramatic stuff, Boogie Nights, Breaking In, which is a really neat movie that most people haven't seen, where he plays a safecracker. Was falling on hard times, but that's kind of where it's, those films are huge hits, but that's sort of like, where do you go from there?
Yeah. Well, he I guess at one time was the number one movie star in the world, and he built his reputation on cars and certainly White Lightning and Gator. Those movies, I also saw when I was a kid. Those I think are a little more mature, but still,
a little bit.
Yeah,
but I mean,
really,
I watched them. They're still pretty innocent. Although it's weird that White Lightning and Gator, he's playing the same character, but. I think White Lightning is more of a drama and Gator is more of a comedy. I think that's how it goes.
Yeah, I think so.
I haven't watched them back to back in a while, and the tone of the films is completely different. But there's still a lot of action, a lot of swamp buggy kind of moonshine and sort of back road kind of thing, and which he excelled at, and then he started to climb out of that a little bit. He did some serious cop dramas like Fuzz and Seamus and that kind of thing. But then you get a film like Hooper, where people just want to see Burt Reynolds behind the wheel of a car.
Yeah.
WW and the Dixie Dance Kings is another one which has never been released on video as far as I know. That's one of the kind of ones that's fallen by the wayside, where he's like the manager of a Southern country band, but they also get involved in bank heists and
that's what I've never seen.
It's kind of like this back road heist chase action, sort of sub Bonnie and Clyde stuff happening, but it's pretty good natured, but it's got this musical aspect to it as well as the crime part of it and the chasing. It was like they were just throwing every genre they could think of into this one film, and I saw it on like a edited for TV network broadcast or something like that, and I've really fond memories of it, but it's never been on video, and I don't know why that. Considering his popularity, it's odd that it's still.
Well, it is popularity, but it's I don't think he gets much respect these days. So I don't know if there's a big call for them putting a lot of that stuff on DVD or resuscitating some of his lost movies. But before we completely leave Roger Corman behind, I wanted to give a tip of my hat to Death Race 2000 from 1975. Now, this was one going back to watch old car movies, was maybe the one that I enjoyed the most, just by its verve and its satiric punch. David Carradine, it's a future vision where people are driving cars in a cross-country road race, and the more people they kill, the more points they get, and they will win the race through killing pedestrians and anyone. And there's ratings for how points for babies, for senior citizens, and so on and so forth. The whole thing is televised, and it's a super popular event. The number one the heroic driver is Frankenstein, played by David Carradine. Sylvester Stallone is his main competitor, Machine Gun Joe Viterbo, also starring Mary Warrenov as Calamity Jane. And this is a satire of media, sports, revolutions, ideology, and celebrity. Like, it's amazing the different bases that this thing touches, and it's hilarious still. Like, it's up there, I think, with RoboCop and some of those films in terms of a true, really terrific, ageless satire, a future vision satire, all with cars.
Well, Paul Bartel was a master satirist, usually on a fairly low budget, and with a really biting edge to it. I mean, he's kind of like the West Coast version of John Waters. But he'd like everything to have a bit of a twist to it, and Death Race certainly, it's funny that 2000's come and gone, and it's it hasn't quite come true, but you think about how it looks ahead to reality television and that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
It was kind of on the money in some regards.
And again, don't watch the remakes are, well, they are what they are, but they're not a spot on the original.
Yeah, I haven't seen the Death, because I think there's two of them. There were two Death Race remakes in recent years, and I haven't seen them. And obviously, they're kind of riding the coattails of the Fast and Furious. It's like, well, what's another franchise with cars? Because there was an actual sequel to Death Race 2000 called, I think, Death Sport. I think Carradine's back in that. I just remember an image of him riding a ridiculous-looking motorcycle with machine gun turrets on the front or something like that. But it's certainly not on the same level as the original. And just prior to this, Paul Bartel, I know his Paul Bartel made Cannonball with an exclamation point. So Cannonball, which was based on the Coast to Coast Road Rally that also inspired Gumball Rally, which also inspired Cannonball Run 1 and 2.
There you go.
And I suppose Cannonball Run 3, which was retitled and I think released only in Canada or something like that, Speed Zone or something like that. It's really, really terrible.
Okay, but, I haven't seen it all.
But Cannonball is basically the progenitor of all of those, where it's the coast-to-coast road race. David Carradine's in it. I think one of his, Keith Carradine maybe, or Robert Carradine, I think, his brother is in it. And Dick Miller, staple of Roger Corman movies,
of course, shows
up, probably playing a cop, as usual. But if you can find it, I think a lot of those Corman films have come out through Shout Factory, so they're worth seeking out for sure.
So one thing I noticed about watching all the Fast and Furious movies and then watching movies from the 70s is how much I learned about Los Angeles city streets.
Oh my gosh!
By watching these movies, like the bridges over the Los Angeles River, the first or fourth or sixth street bridges are constantly being shot on. You see them all the time in advertisements, but you also see them in these movies. Furious 7 and also the 2nd Street Tunnel, which is made famous in Blade Runner, they show up. These parts of Los Angeles show up again and again in these movies, and I saw them all in The Driver from 1978. This is the Walter Hill movie, in which Ryan O'Neal plays a getaway driver who's very taciturn and a kind of obnoxious detective named The Detective, played by Bruce Dern, wants to get him, and he's willing to pretty much do anything, including bending all the rules of law to track this guy down and setting him up and entrap him. And Isabella Gianni plays the player, who is someone who's just kind of like hanging around and making money where she can in casinos. I think Dern kind of is the villain of the thing, and there's some amazing driving sequences. Most of it, if not all of it, is shot at night in L.A. And I didn't find that the dialogue was terribly great, but it has an inestimable coolness, this movie. Just awesome. It
definitely does. I think Bruce Dern probably gets the best lines, or at least he's the best at delivering some of this stuff. He's furiously drinking Coca-Colas constantly in this film, so he's all hopped up. And he's got some weird perm hairdo that just makes me laugh.
78.
Yeah, it's funny. For some reason I thought this film was from earlier in the 70s, because it just feels like such a 70s movie. But it's actually pretty late in the decade. And it's funny, when I was watching Fast 7 or Fury 7, whichever 7 it is, I saw they go over the bridge, and I'd just seen that in The Driver, which I rewatched on the weekend, and then 4th Street. He goes around a corner in 4th Street, and I swear they're just using the same setup from The Driver. I don't know if it was an homage or just LA's been covered from every angle by this point, but you're right about the geography. Like, I've never been to Los Angeles, but friends of mine who've been tell me that I would lose my mind because I just, there's very few corners and nooks and crannies that I haven't already seen in a movie. So it's going to be very odd when I eventually get down there.
Well, when I went, which was only a couple of years ago, I thought about it in advance. I thought, of all the cities in the world I've never visited, I know LA the best. And going and being able to connect the dots for where these locations are all in relation to one another by virtue of the films I've seen was a huge joy. It was great, and I really recommend it. Just go down there and make sure, map it out in advance, and then go and see these spots. Drive around the daytime, rent a car, because there's no point in walking anywhere in LA. You got to drive because the distances are so great, and the public transit isn't worthwhile. Then you just go and see these places, and certainly the downtown area is best featured in these car movies.
The driver is interesting that Ryan O'Neal is kind of playing a tough guy. Who's like cool under pressure and seems to be one step ahead of everybody who's after him. And because that wasn't really his kind of MO for a long. I mean, he was, I guess he was on Peyton Place, a TV show in the 60s, and of course his big breakout film was Love Story with Ally McGraw. And yet he was kind of had a reputation for being kind of a bland, pretty boy. But then I keep getting surprised by him in films like Paper Moon, for example. Certainly the Driver, and there's another one I'm trying to think of. I just blanked out on, but Nickelodeon, another Bogdanovich film. I mean, he was kind of and Barry Lyndon with Stanley Kubrick, where he was kind of like a blank slate. I mean, his kind of, I think his blandness, kind of the same way that Tom Cruise gets used in Eyes Wide Shut, that he kind of uses him as kind of a blank canvas for the audience to project stuff onto.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But very effective in those kind of roles. And here it's not like a really challenging role. He just kind of has to kind of grit his teeth and not say too much. But somehow he pulls it off, and he's very kind of appealing. After years of being a sensitive guy, he gets to play a tough guy without having to change too much.
Yeah, or really, I mean, there's a few action scenes, but mostly he's just behind the wheel of the car.
Yeah.
There's a great scene right in the middle where he drives this Mercedes around an empty parking garage that's very well lit.
Oh, yes.
And he just tears the doors off the thing, literally. It's amazing. Yeah, it's great. It's a great scene. He's basically proving his worthiness as a getaway driver.
His prowess.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever, there's a video game I've played on PlayStation, but I'm pretty sure it's PS as well, or PC, it's just called Driver. But it's basically this movie just in video game form, because I was sort of getting these flashbacks to this game, because I think some of the cars are sort of like the car is kind of Mustangy in the video game, not specifically, enough to get by copyright, but they're borrowing situations where you've got to pick up guys from a heist and then get chased by the cops and stuff. And certainly films like this and Bullet have kind of influenced that game, but I had to stop playing it because every time I got behind the wheel of a car, I started to, I was playing a lot of it back when I actually, played video games or had the time to play them. And that one really appealed to me, but then I couldn't get near a car for a while because it would just get me too frustrated.
Yeah, that's a scary feeling when the video game driving games overlap with the with reality.
Yeah, but I did like that game because all the cars were like 70s cars, and it wasn't, Formula One or NASCAR or whatever. It was really about, muscle cars and running away from the cops.
Yeah. I wanted to also mention, for people who know the Nicholas Winding Refn film Drive from 2011, how it's not an official remake, but there are so many parallels, and I think it's just a loving homage to that previous film. The Ryan Gosling, another Ryan, plays a guy named Driver, who is a getaway driver, and the opening sequence where he is basically timing himself as he parks and he waits for two guys to come out where they've got the masks on and they're coming up with their ill-gotten gains, and then he drives around downtown LA as the cops are following, and again over that same bridge.
Yes.
And eventually the way he loses them is he drives into the Staples Center just as the ball game is finishing, the basketball game, I think, and all the crowds are coming out, and he just leaves the car behind, puts on a baseball cap, and walks away. And that is so much like The Driver. People who are familiar with the Refn film should go back to watch this would make a great double feature, frankly.
You do get a weird sense of deja vu while watching it. But it's there's the cool collected driver character and the kind of panicky bad guys, who are kind of freaking out over one thing or another, and he's got to kind of outthink them and outdrive them and use his skills to get away. I guess the one wrinkle is that I guess he's in this film he actually is a stunt driver professionally,
right? Yes,
who does the sort of criminal wheel work sort of on the side sort of thing. But so there are some other new wrinkles. There's the romance is kind of played up a little bit more than it is in the driver. You sort of expect it to go in a certain way, and it doesn't in that film. But I really felt like a throwback in a good way.
Yes,
to watch this, and that it wasn't so much about plot. It was more about character and having that drive the action. And I really liked that kind of eye for detail of not getting as hung up on movie cliches that you expect from an action. Oh, it's got to have this kind of romance and this kind of redemption and all that kind of thing. It's interested in telling a different kind of story.
Absolutely, and I think it's heavily indebted to in a more postmodern way. Like it's self-aware, I guess, as most great movies are these days that are somehow in the tradition of these older movies. They're movies, but they fit in with the overall, I think, arc of the genre, which I think it's great. And I'm a big fan of Refn anyway, generally. So I think. So I think before we wrap up, I would really just like to say that a couple more movies that really fit in this genre, and I have to go back to when I was a kid and how much I love cars and how much I love movies about cars. Certainly the Blues Brothers has a place in my heart. The Bluesmobile, which is in the movie 1974 Dodge Monaco, another Dodge, as a former police car that Elwood buys because it's got a cop motor, a 440 cubic inch plant, it's got cop tires, cop suspension, cop shocks. It's a model made before catalytic converters, so it'll run good on regular gas, and that's why he gets it. But of course, the cigarette lighter is broken. Of course. So that's a wonderful car movie in its own way, even though it's really about music. I think my favorite car movie of all time has got to be The Road Warrior, and I don't want to talk about it too much because I think we're going to come back to talk about Mad Max as a franchise when the new Mad Max opens on May 15th, which I cannot wait for, frankly. But The Road Warrior is just the truest car movie in some ways, just by virtue of it being just those incredible stunt sequences in the film. And it's I realize it's not really about fetishizing the cars themselves or even identifying with them. I don't think the Mad Max is his car in this movie, because his car gets smashed up about halfway through. Yeah. Though it does mean he has to sort of reinvent himself, because he certainly his character has a change after the car gets smashed up and he has to be rescued basically from the desert. But it's more just about the forward momentum, and that's the thing that I really loved about that movie.
Yeah, again, we're going to talk about these later. I'm a big fan of the original Mad Max too, just because just that wide open Australian landscape and just cars throwing themselves down the highway. Like, it felt like they were being propelled by catapults. It wasn't even like there wasn't a motor involved. Yeah. And Road Warrior, the cars sort of become monsters in a way. Mm-hmm. When they've been sort of altered and had the iron plating stuck on armor plating and all that kind of stuff. And if you've seen the trailer for Fury Road, obviously they take that to a whole another level in this new iteration of the character in his world. So I can't wait to see that and revisit these other films, because I definitely want to go back and redo the trilogy. Even though I'm not getting my hopes up for Thunderdome, but there you go.
There you go. Yeah, and I mean, seeing all these movies again, I just want to get behind the wheel right now. That's what I want to do.
I'm scared too. It's a little frightening after so much carnage. Having we were talking before that we started rolling about how I had a little fender bender not too long ago, and the headache of just trying to deal with an insurance company is like, you never see that in a movie. You never see Dom from Fast and Furious having to complain to his agent about trying to get a fender panel restored or something like that, and going through can I speak to your supervisor? And
that's pretty unsexy right there.
I know. Yeah. It just takes the wind out of those sails right away.
Yeah, for sure.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. You can contact us on Twitter at Lends Me Your Ears, all one word, or search for Lends Me Your Ears on Facebook.
We're on Stitcher, and you can rate and review us on iTunes, and if you do, we'll give you a shout-out in a future episode. Our email is lendsmeyourEarsPodcast@gmail.com. I'm Carsten Knox, and my Twitter is at Carsten Knox.
And I'm Stephen Cook, and my Twitter is at @CH_SCOOKE.
The next time, we're going to be talking about tech gone bad in conjunction with Ex Machina and Avengers Age of Ultron. You've been listening to Lends Me Your Ears, and we'll see you somewhere down the road.
Lends Me Your Ears is hosted by Stephen Cook and Carsten Knox and is produced in Halifax, Nova Scotia at Village Sound for the Village Soundcast Network. Lends Me Your Ears is engineered by Luke Badio and is produced by Dave Anderson and Jason Michael McIsaac. All music courtesy of Gypsophilia. Check out all of their amazing music, tour dates, and so much more at gypsophilia.org. Discover more great shows on the Village Soundcast Network by going to villagesoundcast.com. We can also be found on Twitter at VSoundcast and on Facebook by searching the Village Soundcast Network. Rate and review us on iTunes and you'll get a shout-out on an upcoming show. Send feedback to lendsmeyourEarsPodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
This was a Village Soundcast Network original production.